I'd like to emphasize that although many of us are participating or observing from various remote locations, all members of our community are welcome to participate in this meeting. According to Governor Newsom's executive order, Vista Unified will hold a virtual meeting with no requirements to identify a physical location. Tonight is a fully virtual meeting. This meeting will be held via teleconferencing. This is a special board meeting. The meeting agenda was posted to the Vista website 24 hours in advance. Information for members of the public to access the meeting electronically were included in the posted agenda. All materials that will be referenced during this meeting can be found on board docs posted to the Vista Unified website in the same manner that they have been for the past year. Due to the fact that this meeting will be conducted fully in a virtual environment, there will be a number of procedures in place to ensure that the meeting proceeds smoothly and without interruption to the board members. We are using a digital platform, live streaming, to conduct the meeting. With this system, all members of the public may watch and listen to the meeting. The public will not be able to interact with the board members unless they want to speak to an item on the agenda. Public comment. Any member of the public who wishes to speak to an item on the agenda must email Christina Lupola to indicate their interest. Her email is posted on the website. Your request for comment should be submitted prior to the item on the board meeting agenda. When the board president is ready to hear comments from the public, Christina will unmute members of the public who submitted hold cards to make a statement. The total allowed time for public comment on any agenda item shall be limited to 20 minutes unless the time is waived or changed by the majority of the board. Once the time allowed expires, the speaker will be muted. The time allowed for each speaker will be determined by the majority of the board. In order to maintain the integrity of the board meeting, we have measures in place to guard against inappropriate access or hostile takeover of the teleconferencing platform. These measures include blocking audio, video, and chat access for members of the public. Members of the public may also be removed from the meeting in the event there is inappropriate material or audio shared. This meeting itself may be canceled immediately in the event of a cyber attack. While this procedure may seem dramatic, there have been recent attacks on teleconferencing meetings within California and our county. The superintendent will facilitate the meeting in an effort to support the board president to navigate the virtual environment. This facilitation may include interruptions during the meeting to ensure that all board members have access to the necessary reference material and are able to discuss the item in an orderly manner. Roll call vote. All actions will be approved using the roll call vote approach to ensure, for the record, the vote of each board member. This meeting is currently being recorded. And last but not least on this section, I would like to thank Alma Cacho and Vivian Boring, who are providing district interpretation. I'm going to share my screen just for a moment to make sure that folks that need interpretation are able to get it. Para escuchar la transmisión en español, visite el sitio web de VUSD y seleccione el icono o la imagen para interpretación. Gracias. Almost finished. Thank you for your patience. All right, and before we begin, before I hand it off to the board president, I would like to ask everyone to join me in this special board meeting tonight to observe a moment of silence to honor the victims of the tragedies and the senseless acts of violence perpetrated on March 22nd in Boulder, Colorado, and March 16th in Atlanta, Georgia. Our hearts go out to the families and friends of every victim. As a city, state, and nation, we must band together to address violence of any kind perpetrated against any human being. So let's take a moment of silence. Thank you. And with that, President Vargas, I'll turn the meeting over to you.
Perfect. With that, I call this meeting to order at 5 p.m. We had closed session. No actions were taken during closed session. With that, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. With that, I'm going to seek for a motion to approve the agenda. There are 4 discussion items this evening. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as is?
I make a motion to approve the agenda as is.
Motion on the floor. Is there a second?
A second.
Perfect. Any discussion on this? Seeing none, we'll call the vote. Trustee Kelly?
Aye.
Trustee Smithfield?
Aye.
Trustee Alvarado?
Aye.
Trustee Morton?
Aye.
And aye. Agenda is approved. With that, we will go ahead and go into overview of Court Case 37-2021. And with that, implications for Vista Unified. We do have a couple hold cards. And with that, Chris Lupola, we'll call your name. Chris, how many speakers do we have?
President Vargas, we have 1 hold card request for this item, but let me verify if they are in attendance.
Perfect.
President Vargas, I do not see their name listed as an attendee. I will request they send the statement. I'll forward that to the board members.
All right, perfect. And so with that, we will go ahead into the not presentation, but overview of the lawsuit. And with that, this evening we have Randy, who is representing Vista Unified in this case. Randy, you have the floor.
Thank you. My name is Randy Winnett. I'm an attorney here in Vista, and I'm here to provide you an overview regarding the civil litigation. In early March, earlier this month, a lawsuit was filed by a number of students and parents in northern San Diego County against the state of California and multiple different school districts, including the Vista Unified School District. The lawsuit is what's called a temporary restraining order and writ of mandate. What that type of legal action is a request for the court to enjoin or prevent action from occurring. And so it's a little bit different than an ordinary lawsuit, but this was filed and focused primarily upon the state of California. The focus of the lawsuit was to address the issue of reopening schools and the fact that the plaintiffs, that is the students and the parents, were claiming that the state of California was preventing the reopening of schools and had set forth criteria which the plaintiffs felt was unconstitutional and improper and stopped the reopening of schools. The schools that were named initially, including Carlsbad and San Diego and Poway, they had representation. Vista and Oceanside Unified School District actually were not even joined in the lawsuit until there'd already been a couple of hearings. And the service of Vista occurred after some of the initial hearings. But the effect and crux of the lawsuit was issues relating to this issue involving the state. The court originally heard this matter. It would have been on the 10th of March and determined that several of the school districts had not been served. So the court continued the hearing to March 15th. March 15th, the court heard all of the evidence and then came out with an initial ruling. That initial ruling had language to the effect that the state should be enjoined, effectively stopped, from trying to enforce certain provisions of what was called the January 14th, 2021 framework. The order was rather broad, and so the attorneys involved all asked the court to clarify its language. The court came out with a second order, and that was dated March 17th of 2021, clarifying its order and specifying exactly what the court was ruling upon. That order has been uploaded in the board documents so that the public has access to that order and can follow along if it would like to regarding my discussion of that order. The court ruled that there were 4 parts of the January 2021 framework that were unconstitutional and would be enjoined or effectively not enforced. One was the definition of reopening of schools. 2 was the criteria used by the state involving the reopening of schools. 3 was while schools were in the purple tier, trying to differentiate between elementary and secondary schools. And 4th was a mandate by the court that under no circumstance could student chairs be closer than 4 feet apart. Those specific 4 pieces of that framework from the state of California were enjoined with a temporary restraining order from the judge. That restriction or enjoining occurred to the state of California, not to any of the individual school districts. In fact, the reason why that occurred was because many of the school districts were making efforts to try to reopen on their own, and they were being restricted by the state by having these rather arbitrary criteria that the court said were unconstitutional. So this order that's attached, and you can see, applies to the state. And then there is another separate part of the order that the court cited a recent statute and said, and the school district defendants are to try to reopen in-person instruction as soon as reasonably possible in a reasonably practicable manner. And what the court said during the hearing was that means while following the San Diego County Court guidelines. So that was the direction provided by the court. Now, the Vista Unified School District was in a unique situation than the other school districts, and they were actually way ahead of the game for 2 reasons. Number one, the Vista Unified School District was never timely served with the lawsuit in the first place. And the court in its order even referenced earlier that there was some question about whether it would even apply because Vista wasn't properly served to Vista. However, the court was addressing state mandates, which would be statewide, so it would apply to all school districts anyway, but Vista was not timely served. Secondly, and even probably more importantly, is that before this lawsuit was even filed, Vista was already way ahead of the game as far as working to reopen their schools. They'd already put plans in place, items were moving forward, and so Vista is ahead of many of the other school districts because they already had plans in places and were moving forward to trying to open up as soon as reasonably possible for in-person instruction. So then the question became, okay, well, we have this order and it's a temporary restraining order from the court. That temporary restraining order is just put into place for a period of time, in this case, at least until April 8th, until the court can hear from the school districts and anybody else, and then determine whether that will be a permanent order or injunction. From my experience in dealing with cases like this, it is most likely that that temporary restraining order will be an injunction against the state of California. And in fact, at this point in time, there are discussions going on about trying to resolve the case with the state of California and possible resolution with the school districts as well. From our perspective, the order, and you have it in front of you, it doesn't specifically reference Vista Unified School District anywhere in the order. It does reference that the defendant school districts should open up their school districts as soon as reasonably possible. And it looks like it's up on the screen, and that's under item number 3 on page 3, where it says ordering the school district defendants to reopen their school districts for in-person instruction to the greatest extent possible at the earliest practicable time. That's the only provision that really directly applies to Vista as well as the other school districts. And that provision, consistent with what Judge Freeland said on the court record, is still subject to the San Diego County Public Health Records. So school districts are to try to open school districts as soon as reasonably practicable, but within the parameters provided to them by the San Diego County Department of Health. So Vista is already in the process of following that process. They've been working for it even before this lawsuit was filed. And my belief is that there is at least a fair chance the case may in fact resolve with communications with the state and the other school districts before the April 8th final injunction hearing. Even if it doesn't resolve, we believe that Vista is situated in a good position and that they have been doing everything they can beforehand and since the order to comply with it. And so from our perspective, we doubt that there will be any further language from the court that will be district specific to the Vista Unified School District. And it does appear that where things are moving with discussions with the state as well as other school districts, everyone's trying to move toward what's already in this temporary restraining order, which is open the school districts for in-person instruction within the parameters of what's provided by San Diego County Health. So that's the status of the case right now. We think that, again, Vista is uniquely situated not only because they were served late, but also because they were already making this move prior to the time that this court order came out. And the court order effectively primarily is only against the state of California. So that's a synopsis and overview of the civil litigation in the case.
Thank you, Randy. With that, Dr. Doyle, did you want to add any other context before moving into Q&A for board members?
Thanks, President Vargas. The only context I would add is one of the conversations that we had with Randy as we are working through this case was him asking us to inquire at the county health agency level where their position was with regard to our recommendations for opening. And we did have that meeting today with Gary Johnson. He is the official representative for the San Diego County Health and Human Services Agency and is in charge of all health and safety decisions in our county. We had that meeting with board president and board president Vargas and vice president Morton. And he has indicated that they fully support our plan for reopening, and they have reviewed all the health metrics and measures that we have in place to support students and our staff, and that there is no additional requirements at the county level that would supersede any identifications of the reset for the Cdph guidelines that just recently happened. So the county is supportive of this unified opening 5 days a week.
Thank you for that. Board members, questions for Randy? Julie?
Not so much for Randy, but Dr. Doyle, could you enlighten us about the ultimate disposition of our exemption application to the state of California? I think that's a good moment to update everybody on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually did, we filed the exemption, the request for exemption 2 weeks ago. The state was actually late in responding to it, quite a few days late in responding to it. They had 7 days and they didn't get back to me for 11 days. We did receive it last night at about 7 o'clock. And their response was that in light of the new revisions to the Cdph guidelines, for which we're going to go over at the next agenda item, so you'll hear the details of that coming up, they have, and I'm going to use the terminology to use, quote unquote, retired the exemption process. And so now the exemption is no longer in play because they addressed the 2 items that we requested in the exemption, which was stable groups and social distancing. Since they adjusted that criteria, they no longer felt it was appropriate for them to answer our request for the exemption. So it is officially retired. And in that paragraph, they did identify that Vista Unified is allowed to reopen as requested.
Thank you. Trustee Smithfield? You're muted.
Okay, I have a question for you, Matt. So you just you just talked about your meetings today with Gary Johnson at the county. And so this is kind of for both of you and Randy. So my understanding was the guidelines we have to follow, who we have to get approval for 5 days a week is the county. Is that correct?
Excuse me, let me answer that. The answer is that is correct. The county has a public health order, which the school districts must follow. That public health order also incorporates the state of California framework. And that framework has a number of recommendations, and it also had some issues, and 4 of those issues were struck down by the court. The court made it very clear that it was striking down just those 4 items within that state framework. So that state framework still applies through the county public health order to the Vista Unified School District, absent those 4 items that were struck down. But to answer your question, yes, the school district must follow San Diego County Public Health, which incorporates some of the guidance from the California Department of Public Health.
So since Gary Johnson already gave us the okay several times from the county, we're good to go as far as that goes. Yes, no?
Well, yeah, it is correct that we have received the green light and approval from the County Health and Human Services Agency, Gary Johnson, to return students to campus 5 days a week. Correct.
Thank you.
I do want to share this language just so there's no ambiguity. This is the actual email we received from the California Department of Public Health. And I want to read this paragraph so everyone's clear. So their response to our request was, as such, the safety review request process is being retired as it addresses those 2 specific elements of the guidance. Accordingly, your schools are permitted to reopen and or conduct operations consistent with the requirements of the updated guidance, which is the Cdph guidance that Randy just went over, and any applicable local health orders. And when we met with Gary earlier today, we did specifically ask the question, are there any additional local health orders that would be more stringent than the revised California Department of Public Health orders? And his answer was absolutely not. Their requirements are aligned and the same as the current California Department of Public Health orders.
Trustee Alvarado or Trustee Morton?
Is there any reason to delay our opening for any other reason? Is there? It says it to open as soon as possible or practicable. I'm not clear on. So does that mean as soon as we can, we have to open? We have nothing's holding us back.
The answer is the order, which was showed previously, it is actually language that comes from a California recent statute. As far as it reading, schools must reopen their schools for in-person instruction to the greatest extent possible at the earliest practicable time. Once again, so that means, yes, you have to make that effort. You've got to do that, but within the San Diego County Public Health orders. So that objective has to be met and it has to be done. That's consistent with California law that existed before this order was issued. And so that is what schools are directed to do. That is open as soon as you can, but you have to do so safely within the county public health orders.
Randy, can you speak, like we got an update today of the court order being pushed back once again, and with the conversations with the state that are happening, so there's 2 pathways that could happen here. And so can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So with the court's temporary restraining order, with this type of lawsuit, it's called a writ of mandate. Court issues a temporary order, and then it says, okay, I'm going to allow for more time. The temporary order means, hey, there's an emergency we're dealing with here. And in this situation, it's, hey, schools are not being allowed to reopen based upon what the state's doing. So there's an emergency, we need to stop that. And the court issued a temporary restraining order as to those issues against the state. the court then says, well, and I want further briefing, and then I will determine later, 2 weeks later, whether or not this is going to be a permanent order. In other words, I can still be influenced the other way, but this is where I'm going right now. Now, what the court did is it originally set that date for April 1st for the hearing on whether this would be a permanent injunction order. Just today, that date has been kicked back now to April 8th for that injunction order. And the reason it's been kicked back is because there are ongoing discussions with the plaintiffs, which would be students and their parents, and the state. And now they're also trying to bring in the school districts into those discussions. And so there is a potential that instead of this becoming a permanent injunction order April 8th, that there could be an agreement whereby the state and the individual school districts could enter into an agreement with the plaintiffs where the court doesn't even need to get to that point. Now, whether we get there or not, we don't know, but it seems pretty clear what guidance we've been provided by the court. And my understanding is the state's not really interested in trying to enforce those provisions in which it has been restrained from trying to enforce. So there will be efforts made to see if this litigation can be kind of cut short and ended early. And if that happens, terrific. If it does not, then we have to file, our papers would be due a week from Thursday on behalf of the Vista Unified School District. We'll see if we even get to that, but that's a possibility. If that settles, terrific. If it does not, then we'll submit papers and we'll see what the court does. Again, trying to look in my crystal ball, I would say that it's likely that what you're going to see in this temporary restraining order will be similar to what will be in the injunction.
Got it. And as a follow-up, this word of as reasonable and as practicable has always been a challenge. And so with the, the other context is that every school district, and we had this conversation in our equity workshop a couple weeks ago, that every school district is at a different place. Obviously, we are ahead, opening up, and with that, the mitigating measures that we have put in place. But with the, can you define who, or can you elaborate on who's going to be the enforcer of this as practicable and as reasonable?
That's a very good question. And I guess I think the issue would be is I don't believe that there will be a request for that definition unless there is an actual effort made by a school district not to try to open up as soon as reasonable. So in other words, we're not going to have, because of this order, all school districts just opening to in-person instruction only, the next week or the next 2 weeks. Everyone has to follow the guidelines of county public health, but it needs to be moving toward this in-person instruction and try to do so to the best of your ability as soon as reasonably possible. That doesn't mean it has to be done overnight, but it needs to be, hey, we've got a plan in place. Here's the plan. Here's what we're doing, fitting within the county guidelines. I think it's only a situation where someone is going to argue, hey, the district is not moving or not trying to do this, where they'll take it back to the court, and the court would generally be the entity, or the judge would be the person who would say, hey, I ordered that and I've been given this information that shows that you're not trying to follow my court's order. So it would be the court who would actually decide that. But you're right, that language gives school districts quite a bit of wiggle room, but it has to be one of those things where the school districts made their, let's say the school district said, hey, we want to make our own restrictions to keep our schools closed. I don't think that's going to pass muster with the court. So the direction is open up your schools subject to the county health guidelines, and don't start trying to make your own rules on how to do things. This is the direction given by the court.
Yep, and I guess the reason for that question, that is subjective, and depending on who you ask, different thoughts, different opinions on whether we are doing it right or whether we're not following. And so, that'll definitely create some confusion as we look at districts. And I think part of the other thing we're being challenged with is, well, what is Vista Unified doing that Oceanside is not doing, or what is San Marcos doing that Encinitas is not doing? So like the compare and contrast, and obviously once again, every district is at a different point in time, and with the the things that they have done. And we can only speak for Vista Unified because we know what we have been doing over the last couple months.
And Vista, from my observation, is ahead of the game. They've been ahead of the game since before the lawsuit was filed and even now. And I think so. I think they just keep on doing what they have been doing. That is trying to get things open for in-person instruction within the guidelines from the County of San Diego.
So,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So when this started, that was a sticking point when they used words as practicable, which I've grown to hate, and such words, and nobody wanted to give those a definition that we could follow. So going forward, when they say open as practicable, and they say once your county says you can go in, then it is practicable. So since we already got the county okay, in my mind, and I could be wrong, that says then there's no reason for you not to open ASAP. Am I right in that?
I agree, subject to the San Diego County Public Health orders and directives. So in other words,
Right, but we already got the okay. So when I'm thinking of just Vista Unified, and we've already got the okay from the county saying you've come and you are ready to go, then because of the court order, we are really bound into opening. I won't say immediately because that's not practicable, but soon.
you're correct.
Thank you.
I have a question regarding the families that may have initially chosen virtual instruction, but now in the context of this TRO, the new guidelines by the California Department of Health and the CDC. If are we somehow liable if those parents also now want to return to in-person instruction? I mean, how does that, in other words, these are parents who initially chose to be virtual the entire year, but now within the context of all these changes would want a change. Are we liable to or obligated also to bring them back?
So let me make sure I've got your question down, and that is you've had somebody who's been virtual all year, and now they want to come back for in-person instruction. Are you required to provide them in-person instruction? And I don't mean to be too evasive on it, but it goes back to fitting in the order, and the answer would be yes, as soon as reasonably possible, as practicable as you can. So does that mean that you can bring everybody back from virtual to in-person in a day or two? No, of course you couldn't possibly do that. But to the extent that somebody wants to do that, and Vista has the ability reasonably possible and practical to do so, yes, they need to provide that in-person instruction for them. So there needs to be something put in place. Now, once again, people often think that you can just make these decisions and things can flip a switch overnight. And obviously running a school district and trying to make these type of decisions and putting persons and assets into place takes some time. Vista's already ahead of the game in doing those things, but they need to continue to do so to make them possible for in-person instruction for that student who's been virtual and says, hey, now I want to be in person. There needs to be something to try to get that moving in that direction. It doesn't have to be done overnight.
So it could be when a spot opens up, if their school of choice and their grade level, all the in-person spots are filled, reasonable would be when a spot comes open. Matt, Randy?
So from my perspective,
Rachel?
from my perspective, the answer is yes. We've actually been doing that all along for our elementary school students. If a parent and a student that chose virtual but want to shift to classic, we work to accommodate them. It's important to note, and we've been very consistent with this with our parents all along, that accommodation may not necessarily be in the classroom they started in, and sometimes it may not necessarily be at the school that they started in, but we would work to accommodate their request. I think where it gets complex, and again, my interest is just to be as transparent as possible, is when you get into the high school. Because we might have students at a high school level that is on a track for graduation, where a move like that could somehow interrupt their ability to finish the course of study that they need. So we will work, as we always do, to accommodate their needs, but they may have multiple needs, and we certainly wouldn't want to interfere with their ability to graduate. So I can't give you an exact answer on that, but I can tell you that we have up until now worked proactively with parents to accommodate their needs. I'll give you one more example. In many instances where we have found a space to accommodate a parent for a child, the parent chose to remain at their site in virtual because they wanted to stay at their site in virtual. So they don't always choose the accommodation that we find for them, but we will work to the best of our ability to accommodate them.
So I have a question regarding our employee groups and the MOU that's currently in place. Can you explain how that is affected or not affected by this court hearing?
Well, to ask specifically in regards to the court hearing was a direction against the state of California and gave directions to school districts. It did not touch upon or directly reference necessarily your MOU or your discussions with teachers as far as that goes. But there are separate state orders involving employees and bringing them back to school and requirements that were not touched by this court order. But I believe that what Vista has in place and is moving forward with fits within all of those state issues in regards to its employees. But the order itself did not touch upon those things.
No, I guess, Randy, to follow up on that, the court order didn't touch the MOUs, but it did touch the Cdph guidelines, which is referenced in our MOU.
It touched the what now?
The Cdph, so in our, at least one of our MOUs, it references Cdph, that we would follow the Cdph guidelines.
Well, but the areas that it touched the guidelines, I don't see how that would probably cross over to the area we're talking about. So we're talking about the definition of reopening, criteria for reopening, differentiating between elementary and secondary schools while in the purple tier, which of course we're no longer in. And then the fourth item is the issue of under no circumstance shall students' desks be closer than 4 feet apart. That's been eliminated. And in fact, what's happened is this last Saturday, there were updated California Department of Public Health guidelines where they changed it not only to that used to be a mandate, which has been thrown out. So now they're trying to make it consistent with the CDC, and they're only suggesting it. They're only saying it's a strong recommendation that students' desks be no more than three feet closer to. Should be 3 feet apart. Again, that's a recommendation. That's not a mandate. So if we just take a look at what the court order was, I don't think it really touches upon those other issues involving the employees and everything else. Could be wrong because I haven't carefully gone through all of that, but that certainly wasn't the court's focus. The court's focus was on those limited Cdph guidelines, those 4.
Thank you. And Trustee Kelly, you had your hand up.
I did, and now I have 2 questions. I'm going to go with the second one first because it dovetails right into what Randy was just saying. So I think since in our last board meeting, we voted to accept an amended MOU with one of our employee groups that specifically references by date the January 14th guidance. And it's the social distancing piece that was part of the outcome of our board action items from that meeting as well, was to apply for the exemption and so forth. So Are the new CDPH guidelines still called the January 14th guidelines, or are they now called the March, whatever last Saturday's date was, guidelines?
They're updated and they're dated from this last Saturday. They don't significantly change from my perspective, except mainly in that area, as far as what you'd be doing for reopening schools, which has to do with the distance between desks. And it went from a mandate of 4 feet to a strong recommendation to 3 feet. So I don't think it substantially changed a whole lot, except that it prevented the state from basically just telling school districts, well, if you can't keep 4 feet between student desks, you can't open. Can't do that. State can't do that. So once again, the focus is on the state. State, you can't do this. And so to the extent you say, well, our agreements incorporate these guidelines, and they usually reference also the updates to those guidelines, they still do. It's just that those 4 items have been determined unconstitutional. They're not part of that. But that doesn't, you have the county who incorporate them into the public health order, and you're going to follow the county, and you're going to follow the California Department of Public Health as far as their guidelines. But as far as an agreement, if one of those 4 items was somehow tried to incorporate into that agreement, they're unconstitutional. They can't be enforced. But I think that that's pretty peripheral to those agreements.
Thanks. And then the other question I had might be better answered by Dr. Doyle. And it was more, I believe I know the answer, and you've actually already answered this question, but I think it, in light of some emails we've gotten from concerned parents who are currently opted for Classic, but would prefer to remain on the 1 day a week schedule, or to not be in the full classroom 5 day a week schedule. I believe your answer from before would apply, that we will do our very best to accommodate these students, and help everybody feel comfortable with their options, but that we may run into similar inabilities due to scheduling and graduation requirements and offerings of classes, correct?
Yeah, I don't think I could have done a better explanation, Board Member Kelly. I think you did a great job explaining the situation we're in. We're committed to parent choice. However, when you get up into the high school in particular, we all need to be very careful about a child's pathway to graduation. And so we would have that conversation with the parents, and we would come up with a reasonable solution that met the students' needs and met the parents' needs. So we would clearly continue to work hand in hand with the parent, but it is important to note that stipulation you just mentioned, especially at the high school level. We need to be very careful with the students' pathway to graduation.
Thanks. And there's obviously nothing in the current orders that requires all students to return to Classic or us to provide 100% Classic instruction. That is, we still have the autonomy to offer the 2 models, correct?
I think that's a Randy question. Go ahead, Randy.
And the answer is yes. Yeah. No, you have to try to work for in-person instruction as soon as reasonably practicable, but that doesn't mean that you have to force every student back to that model right now. And in fact, that would be, if you think about it, it really couldn't be worked that way, given where we still are in the issue of the pandemic, vaccinations, everything else. So this is where we need to move. This is where we're going to, subject to the county health orders, but that doesn't mean that every single student has to be jammed into it right away. It has to, what it means is the district needs to be moving that way and trying to go to that direction. It doesn't mean that a student who is in a virtual situation who's on a program and needs to finish that program to graduate has to change that situation and not graduate. I mean, no court is trying to change that and micromanage the school district.
Okay. And since I'm still off mute, one more question would be, ultimately what we're hearing is that the state does not get to decide about our local situation. The county health office does. So in the event that our case numbers start to go high again, and there are, we move back to the purple tier, what happens then in terms of this order? I mean, if our county health officer says, gotta, go back to distance learning, are we in any jeopardy against this order for doing that? And can you walk us through that scenario should it happen?
I will defer mostly to Dr. Doyle on this because there's already been experience with Vista in regards to this
Yeah.
this issue. But no, because the issue is subject to San Diego County Public Health, and San Diego County Public Health has worked closely with, and I should say Vista has worked closely with County Public Health on this issue previously, and they continue to do so now. And so if something like that happens and county health says, hey, you need to close down this school or whatever else, that school is going to get closed down. So, I mean, the safety of the students has got to be always the primary factor. And Dr. Doyle can talk about what actually, I mean, Vista was way ahead of the game trying to do something similar back in October. And he can talk about county health and those issues. Now, if it's okay, Dr. Doyle, I'll defer to you on that issue.
Yeah, it's excellent question, Board Member Kelly. We actually talked about that today with the Health and Human Services Department, Gary Johnson. And so just a couple of bits of information that might be helpful just for background. A year ago, if everyone remembers, when this whole pandemic started, the county health did use what they call the school closure criteria and closed all schools in San Diego County. That county health still retains the ability to do that. That's in their county health order. Dr. Wooten, if you remember, made that call a year ago. Those orders still remain in place. So Dr. Wooten and her team, Gary Johnson and others, still have the ability to supersede school openings across the county if they deem it appropriate based on the health within the county. In addition to that, there's another stipulation, actually it's in the Cdph guidelines and it's also in the county health guidelines, that if a school has over 5% or greater of infection, COVID infections, then that would trigger a closure of that school. And there's a whole written procedure that's outlined in the Cdph guidelines. We know these procedures extremely well. As a matter of fact, Rachel was the one that drove those procedures. And we are in constant communication with the county health team. As you all know, the county health has actually come out and visited our sites, not because we had a problem, but because they wanted to verify that we had all the mitigation measures in place. And they visited more than 3 times. So we feel good about that. We know what the procedures are. They're in place to protect schools. Our schools have never come close to the 5%, but the 5% rule is there. So those procedures are in place. And that's kind of like a relief valve if something happens, as you mentioned, if we climb into the purple again and it gets out of control. I guarantee you Dr. Wooten and her team will close schools down if necessary.
Thank you.
Other questions for Randy or Dr. Hill on this topic?
I have one. At what point would the county say that we need to move from 3 feet to say 4 feet or 5 feet or 6 feet? Is there a number of positive cases, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question too. We asked that question today when we met with Gary Johnson, and the answer is there will never be a point where the county will use a number. Gary Johnson specifically said that there is no evidence, and that's why the court case is at play right now. There's no evidence to suggest that a particular distance they've determined is a causal element of the spread of the virus at this point in time. And so the county is not interested in applying a number to it. What the county has done, and it's important for everyone to know, the people in the audience listening, is that they have health officers. The officer that works with us in Vista Unified, his name is J.D. Malone, Dr. J.D. Malone. He's an epidemiologist. They deploy health officers out to school districts to meet with school personnel, to walk the classrooms, review all of the different health mitigation, safety mitigation activities and actions that are in place, and give us feedback on what we should be addressing. And that's inclusive of student distancing. And Dr. Malone has been at our schools many times, elementary, middle, and high, and given us feedback on it. But the simple answer is they will not use a number for social distancing.
All right, if there are no other questions, we will move on to the next item 4B. Randy, if you could stay on, we do have a discussion, which is item 4C. And with it, we may expect some questions as it relates to the lawsuit. Perfect. With that, item 4B is the status of health and safety, CDC and Cdph guideline revisions, mitigation measures in Vista Unified, and staffing update, including substitute contingency. Chris, how many speakers do we have for this item?
President Vargas, we have 5 hold card requests.
Perfect. So as a reminder, each speaker will have 3 minutes to address the board. And with that, limit your comments to this specific item. And with that, making sure that we follow our protocols. Once you hear the 3 minutes, Chris will mute the speaker. And with that, you'll hear the ring and we'll call the next speaker. So members of the audience do need to be in attendance. And so with that, Chris, please call the first speaker.
Thank you, President Vargas. The first hold card is from Kara Jean Hyde.
Esteemed board members and Dr. Doyle, as you consider the data before you tonight, I ask you to do so in light of what you ask science teachers to do with students, namely follow the claim, evidence, and reasoning process. Back in August, the CDC and American Academy of Pediatrics made a claim that schools should be open for in-person education. They based this claim on evidence about children and COVID and reasoned that, quote, in-person instruction for adolescents is vital to their academic success, social emotional development, safety, nutrition, and physical activity, whereas shutdowns and resultant remote learning have led to massive increases in depression, anxiety, and suicide rates in teen and young adults. As science teaches us to do, as additional data and information come in, we update and modify our claim. Since August, we now have evidence from 191 countries with specific studies out of the UK, Australia, Italy, Switzerland, and Germany showing schools can safely be open with masks and only 1 meter, 3 feet, of social distancing. We have since added studies from Florida, Michigan, Washington, Mississippi, Utah, Missouri, Wisconsin, and Ohio, all showing that all students can safely be on campus with the CDC claim, quote, based on the data available, in-person learning in schools has not been associated with substantial community transmission. And the AAP claim that, quote, our data support the concept that schools can safely stay open in communities with widespread community transmission. We now have more data on the massive increases in drug overdoses, up 119%, intentional self-harm, up 333%, depression, up 90%, and massive learning losses of 3 to 11 months already, compounded for our minority and low-income students who most need an education to change their future. So what revisions have been made for the claims for this school year from the board? In October, you decided to send home entire classes of students for 1 positive case. Fortunately, you revised that claim as it was not based on evidence. In November, you decided to send home all secondary students, also not based on evidence. In January, you decided to keep all elementary home 1 week. The actual evidence shows that as you kept more students home, the COVID numbers increased exponentially, and secondary grades show that students are failing at triple the rate of previous years. As you consider your claims tonight, please use the evidence that 1, Senate Bill 98 requires daily live instruction, which classic students are not getting. 2, California's adoption of 3 feet social distancing combined with the court's restraining order now allow you to have classic students back on campus 5 days a week. And 3, schools are the safest place for students to be right now, and they desperately need in-person education for their social, emotional, physical, and educational well-being. Please do not base decisions off how you feel, but use a scientific process to have evidence and reasoning to support the claims you make. Thank you.
Thank you, Kara Jean. The next speaker is Gina Fierro.
Hi. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Gina, thank you.
Sorry about that. Let me pull up my email. Okay. Thank you. Good evening, trustees and Dr. Doyle. I am reading the statement for myself and the additional 141 people who have signed and asked for me to speak on their behalf. I have asked Christina to please forward this over to the board members so they can see the list of names. Thank you for calling a special board meeting to discuss the reopening plans for our students to get back on campus April 5th. While in my opinion, we have waited too long to get our students on campus, sometimes we have to go to extreme measures to fight for what is right. I am disheartened that it took legal action and court orders for some of the board members to realize the impact that school closures have taken on our students. We've only heard one story in the TRO, but I know there are many more. These stories are of students who live in our community. We classic parents have been asking for months and months to get our students back on campus. We have been following the science and watching the data, but some of you have chose to ignore the pleas of the parents and parents you serve and act with your emotions. The court hearing last week, along with the amended Cdph Guidelines from Friday, leave no more excuses to keep our students off campus for those that have chosen the classic model. We were on campus in October, and because of the lackluster quarantine policy, our students were forced to virtually learn again. The TR states that all school districts named in the complaints are ordered to appear on April 1st to show why they cannot reopen their schools for in-person instruction to the greatest extent possible at the earliest practical time. VUSD was open in October to the greatest extent possible by having all that chose Classic to be on campus. It would be absolutely disgusting for VUSD to come to court and tell the judge that VUSD can't bring back all students who chose the Classic model back on campus. I'm starting to ask myself, along with all these other parents, if our board members actually are capable of doing what is best for our students. It is great to see that colleges are opening up for spring classes on campus. If they can do it, so can you. If college students can go live in dorms and attend in-person classes, then our students deserve the same. I, as a parent and a proud community member, demand that you do the same for those that want to be on campus on April 5th. The CDC states, given the critical services school offer and the benefit of in-person learning, it is critical for K through 12 schools to be open and remain open for in-person instruction as safely and as soon as possible. Schools should be the last settings to close because of COVID-19 and the first to open. I will close this email by quoting Summer Steffens, as her words are what every parent is currently feeling. I am fed up with lip service. I'm fed up with hearing about how the children are our future, but then putting them last in line every single time. Thank you for your time. And Christina, can you please forward that over with that long list of the 141 people?
Yes,
I appreciate it.
No problem.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you, Gina. The next speaker is Carrie Avila.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Carrie, thank you.
Good evening, board, Dr. Doyle. Here we are again, a special board meeting deciding what our future is going to be and how that affects our students. Districts around the state have good relations with their labor units, and that's why we are here to work together for the safety and the education of our students. Again, the environment that your educators are working in are the conditions that your students are learning in. Now, I want to point out something, that Vista schools are open and we are ahead of the game. There is nothing in there that says that we have to rush forward. It's still a temporary TRO, and the constant disruptions, schedule changes also affects our students and our educators. If we are going to do this right, we have to take our time to make sure that we don't have to do it again. Here we are getting ready to plan for next year as well. You have AB. As you have your discussion tonight, please remember that this TRO is temporary till now, April 8th. Spring break starts on Friday. Returning April 5th is going to affect the spring break of many of your educators, your counselors having to plan again. 3 feet distance is what the CDC and the Cdph Guidelines highly recommend. When we went forward on October 20th, social distancing of 3 feet was not in place. Please take your time to do it correctly and do it in a way that is not disruptive to your educators or students. Now, one thing, I'm going to take off my union president hat here, and I'm going to speak as a classic parent who did choose classic. I'm now faced with my son refusing to go back if we go back without social distancing. I am also a member of this community, and it affects my family as well. Please take into consideration that your choices affect many in this community. We all want our kids back on campus. We all want to go back, but we want to make sure that it's a way that it's sustainably open and that we're able to mitigate learning loss. Lower class sizes does that. So hire new teachers. You have demonstrated that 3 feet, you've demonstrated that 4 feet is practicable. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you, Carrie. The next speaker is Katrina Boatwright.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, let me turn off my other one. Actually, I have two things on. Sorry. Can you hear me here?
Yes, but there is an echo, Katrina.
I think I could have two devices. Let me do this way. So I opted to be virtual all year for my daughter. Let me just change this. Hold on a second. Okay. Is this better?
Yeah, that sounds better. Thank you.
Okay.
And if you could just...
And what's happened is I've seen her too. I concur with the rest of the parents. It's been very difficult for her emotionally. However, I have also worked as an essential employee for the last year, and I've seen a lot. We have everybody at work and they don't wear masks. We're in an office environment. Out of 10 people, 8 will wear a mask all day. And to suddenly now have our children wear a mask all day long seems really extreme to me. If all these adults I've seen don't want to do that, we're uncomfortable with that. There's risk with mask wearing, bacterial pneumonia. There's a lot of controversy when it goes to that. So I have a problem when we have Southern California, we can go outside, we can do all kinds of other things instead of just being stuck on the mask, which I know was the first thing that the County Department of Health was talking about. However, at my place of work, we have shower curtains and plexiglass, and we space out, and we only wear a mask when we're in the halls or we come up to each other. I really think we should give the kids the freedom to actually breathe freely and have options to be outside. And really, even on the page 10, it talks about that. It says if there are doubts with mask adherence, consider more robust physical distancing, mitigation layers, stable groups, ventilation, maintaining 6 feet. At work, it's been working. If somebody tests positive for COVID, which has happened, they close down, they do deep cleaning, and it's fine. It hasn't spread. We're not having an issue at work. Having stable groups and having small groups and having kids have the option, giving flexibility to everybody is super important right now because I want my kid back in class. However, I want her to do it and feel good and not be getting tired because she has a mask on all day and she's forced to be stuck right next to people. I mean, we need to just do it carefully and rationally. And also, we already have plans. We made travel plans. I finally have something she's really excited to. She needed it to do certain things. So I want to have that flexibility too. If I've already made other changes that now we have to force everything and go back to school, all of a sudden it really puts everything in my life upside down and her life. And we've already had to adapt and adapt and adapt. So I just think everybody right now should try to find common ground, have some continuity, have some options, let kids have freedom along with teachers. And this mask thing it's not the number one thing. Distancing, giving each other space, that's important. And making sure that they get reminders about if you're sick, don't come to school. Doing the checks, but it's worked. I've been essential this whole time. It's working in an office environment. We do have air filtration as well. So just
Thank you, Katrina. That's time. Thank you. The next speaker is Callie Clark.
Hi, did it unmute?
Yes, thank you,
Oh,
Kelly.
perfect. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you guys for meeting again to discuss your legal obligation according to California law for in-person learning. As SB 98 clearly indicates, virtual learning should not be the norm, and the data shows school is the safest place for kids. Look at Florida. They've been open all along without these so-called super spreader events, at least amongst the students. The staff and faculty, that's a different story. I just have a few things. Cipriano, please don't forget parliamentary procedure tonight. Call for motions, don't make them, and allow for discussion on items. The court of public opinion can make or break a wanting political career. Martha, you've been seen for what you are, and a victim you are not. Your deflection when just being called out for your bias is infuriating. Julie, I've had the utmost respect for you for over 9 years, trusted in you when you campaigned and said that you supported parents' choice given to them by the district. It's extremely sad how an inside breakfast during a time when you're not comfortable to allow kids on campus can show true colors of hypocrisy, and that breaks my heart. Rosemary and Debbie, thank you again and again for continuing to fight for the students. You both have mine and my child's respect, and we're grateful you're doing what you were elected to do. Dr. Doyle, seriously, you have the patience of a saint. And as a parent of VUSD, I'm grateful for you that you're our superintendent. There's nothing holding our district back. Yes.
The discussion tonight is on the reopening. And so if you could direct your comments on the safety, health, and CDC and Cdph guidelines, that's the current scope of work. And so if I'm going to ask you if you could redirect your comment to the presentation and that specific item.
Well, there is nothing holding our district back from getting the students that want to be on campus 5 days a week, except for you guys, the board. Remember, a guideline or a suggestion is not a law. Don't allow the loud wolves to blow the house down yet again. And I will email this to each of you so that there's no need to waste resources on requesting a public comment to be dictated. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. And President Vargas, that was the last hold card for this item.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. And with that, we have a presentation, Dr. Doe.
Thank you, President Vargas. Thank you for members of the public for your comments. We appreciate your feedback. We've put together a short review. We always do this in meetings when we talk about school reopening. So if you would just give us a little bit of patience to get through this, I think it's necessary for the board and for the public to be brought up to speed on what the current status of health and safety is in our school district. We have Rachel D'Ambroso will be assisting with the presentation, and then Dr. Cherie McKeon. Dr. McKeon works with Craig Wablemo. Normally you would see Craig. Craig's been fantastic in providing amazing information, and we thank him. He's on the call right now. Cherie is going to be supporting with the overview tonight. So Dr. McKeon, thank you so much for being here. We would like to go over briefly. Please interrupt, ask questions, board members, if you have questions about it. But the purpose of this presentation is to be brief, but level everyone up to what the current status of health and safety is in Vista Unified. And with that, I will hand it off to Dr. McKeon.
Thank you, Dr. Doyle. Good evening, board members. It's exciting to be able to present to you tonight and to talk about health and safety and how it affects our schools and what we've been doing. So tonight we're going to be going over these following topics: health and safety, CDC and Cdph guidelines, the mitigation strategies that we've had in place, vaccination updates, and then staffing updates for you. I know you're very familiar with this slide already, but it's exciting because if you do notice, we've been dipping down further and further and further into those proper zones. The last report that you actually had showed 6.8 for both the adjusted and unadjusted rates. Today, we did get an update because it does come every Tuesday, and it was 5.5. So once again, we have dropped down even farther on that. What was interesting as I was doing the research on it is that's for San Diego County. They also have a rate for the state. This is for the average daily new cases. And the state was also 5.5. So San Diego is really getting down into the area that we want to see. What's nice is that it's also dramatically narrowing. If you look at the green line, that's the 6 zip unadjusted. And you can see that over time, it's gotten closer and closer to the blue line, which is showing the rates for San Diego County. This chart here shows the percent positivity in test. And as of last week, as you can see, we were looking at 2.8. Today, when I pulled the data, it came in at 2.4%. So once again, going down a little bit further for us and showing that we're right there in that orange tier, which is really is exciting for us to see, because everything that we've been doing as a county is really starting to reflect in these charts. Just for reference, the state average on that was 2%. So getting closer to the state average as well. This chart here shows the new cases by day. And what I like about this is it really shows the trend of what we have all felt over the last many months, showing back in December, January, and February, where we did see those increases. And then by going to the next chart, Dr. Doyle, if you don't mind, this one shows our quarantines. The reason I wanted to point this one out a little quicker than not is because take a look at the pattern, and then Dr. Doyle, will you go back to the other one for me? And then I want you to notice the pattern with the red. You notice it looks that same thing. So what we've got here is where we're seeing larger quarantines was back at that same time of December and January. We're seeing that decrease down. As we go into quarantines that we've had recently, as of Friday, we had 12 classes that were quarantined. When we started the day on Monday, we were down to 9. And when we start school tomorrow, we will be down to 6. This chart here is from the CDC. So I know you're very familiar with the chart that we have that shows the tiers of the purple, the red, the orange, and the yellow for San Diego County. This one here is actually done by the CDC. And if you take our current numbers, which were last week 6.8 and this week 5.5, it actually puts us in the low transmission, or the blue, which is the lowest area that you could be for the CDC chart. Also, if you take the percentage for the positive cases, it's 2.8 last week and 2.4 this week. Again, that puts us in the low transmission, or the blue. So even though in San Diego, if we're looking at the charts that we currently have, it shows us in the orange. If we were to be following the CDC indicators, we would be in the lowest section possible. So as some of the speakers have already mentioned, on Friday, on the 19th, some information came out from the CDC. And one of the things that it highlighted was that the recommendation for students to remain at least 6 feet apart in all classrooms, and I love this part, where masks are universal. I think that was one of the things that really stuck out, because I think back to the August 13th board meeting, when you as a board took a very bold step in making sure, or making a point to have all of our students wearing masks, and anybody that was on any of our school properties. What's nice about this is if you go down to the next section, middle and high school, it also shows that they're recommending that students be at least 3 feet apart. And as we know right now, the guidelines that we've set up our classrooms on have been 6 feet, where we could go down to 4 feet. So we've had that trying to get to 6, but doing 4 if needed. The final thing we have here is on the 19th, it says that they removed the recommendation for the physical barriers. So those are all of the dividers that we do have up in our rooms. Right now, they are considered a recommendation, although we do have them up in all of the classes when students are present. So then on Saturday, the Cdph came out with their guidelines, and they had 3 different items that they wanted to bring importance to. The reason the third one is highlighted is because the first 2 have already been done by Vista Unified. The first one was opening schools for in-person instruction, which we have already done back in October. And the second is posting the safety plans to our websites, which have been done as well. So the third one that we really need to focus on is looking at the physical distancing guidelines for the classroom spacing. This is actually what the guideline reads, and we've underlined some of the highlighted parts for you. It says to maintain a minimum of 3 feet between student chairs is strongly recommended. Again, we right now have everyone at 4 to 6. This would allow us to have an opportunity to go down to 3 feet where practicable, or where we would see that that would enhance having our students back in the rooms. The other thing that this also points out for us is to try to maintain 6 feet of distancing for students if they're at lunchtime. Those are those times when their mask might be down and they're eating or drinking. What we wanted to point out here were the different mitigation strategies that have been put in place for all of us to follow. So this is as of the January 14th update that we had from the Cdph. And these are in order based upon importance, starting with face coverings, stable groups, physical distancing, adequate ventilation, hand hygiene, symptoms and close contact exposure screening, and surveillance or screening testing. All of these are things that we've been doing here in Vista Unified for quite a while. And I know that being part of all of these board meetings, these are things that you've talked about quite a bit. When I look at stable groups, I think about our elementary students and how we have them in specialized groups where they are staying together in those stable groups. And it's helping us to maintain any outbreaks of COVID because we're able to contain it within that group. Physical distancing, we've already discussed. Adequate ventilation. I know that John Wathen has talked about that quite a bit along with Amy regarding how we've upgraded quite a bit of those throughout all of our schools. Hand hygiene, we've put sinks throughout all of our schools, and we've got so many opportunities for the students to have their hands cleaned. Number 6 is kind of interesting. I've had an opportunity to really work closely with the county tracers, and they are so wonderful at helping us really look at when we do have a student that is not well, and we're wondering about the COVID outbreaks, to be able to run that information by them and really get a clear understanding of how to make the decision on those next steps has been so important. And then surveillance and screening testing. We've been fortunate to have the Linda Rhodes Center. And now we're going to be able to begin to look at how could we bring testing to our teachers at our school sites. So since October 20th, we've had many practices in place. Some of the ones that we've already reviewed. Some of the things I think are really exciting to talk about. For example, just having simple things like soap, paper towels, hand sanitizer available for the kids. It keeps the children thinking about hand sanitizing and safety as well. We've also, one of the things that we've really been great about is making sure that teachers' workstations are 6 feet away from students. And that is still in the current guidelines that we've received over the weekend, is to make sure that the teachers have some space, because as we know, most transmission happens adult to adult, not necessarily adult to student or student to student, but we're also wanting to make sure that we're making sure our teachers are safe. Other practices that we've had have been the way that students enter and exit a campus. We've tried to make sure that things are staggered for the students. We've also wanted to make sure that we have systems in place for hallways with signage. We've discouraged small gatherings of students. When the bell rings, we want to make sure that they're moving from point A to point B and not having those gathering times. Lunch protocols have been in place and have been very, very successful at the elementary school. In the middle school, what we've done is I've worked with the secondary principals to make sure that we have spacing at the tables and that we have special zones where the students are eating in those zones, which helps us with any contact tracing that we need to do. And then, of course, we have classrooms that have been emptied out. That's probably one of the toughest things because, as we know, many of us that are teachers at heart, having those things around us have been so important, but our teachers have been very, very gracious in understanding the need to get rid of some of the unnecessary furniture to make room and space for our students. And I think with that, I'm handing it off to Rachel, unless there's any questions.
Questions for Sherry? All right, no questions.
Right. So I'm going to move on into staffing, our staffing update. But prior to the staffing update, we would like to give a vaccination update and kind of outline the rollout of the vaccination and what impact that might have on staffing. And so on February 27th, it was announced that SDCOE and Viva would partner and provide vaccinations for all educators. And all of our schools and the district office were placed into 4 quartiles based on the Health Places Index. And what I identified next to each quartile is the date that those schools were released for vaccination eligibility. So the district provided the list to Viva. Viva contacted the employees directly, and employees have the option to register for the vaccination. So at this point, many of our employees have been vaccinated with the first shot. Okay. So I understand there's a lot of information on this slide, but I think we feel it's really important to understand that the vaccination does impact our employees as far as symptoms, or it could. So the vaccination isn't fully effective until 2 weeks after the vaccination. So employees, we still have to follow the contact tracing guidelines when an employee has symptoms after the first and the second dose. So the first vaccine, they are required to provide a negative test result and improving if they after 24 hours once the symptoms start and end. After the second vaccine, there is a 24 to 48 hour period that they might have symptoms, and so the employee, they would just have to have an improvement in their symptoms. They would not be required to have a COVID test. And we've had many employees that have had their second shot and they're at work that next day, and then some have symptoms. This last piece is interesting because of the variant that has been discussed in the past. There is, after 90 days, during the 90 days, if somebody has symptoms 72 hours after the second shot, they will have a mandatory quarantine of 10 days. Okay. All right. So our staffing update is basically based around absences and an update on our substitute teachers. So what you see here is our absences on each Friday for the last 4 weeks as of last Friday. And you can see a slight increase. And so what I'd like to do is update you on the substitute teachers. We know in past board meetings, we did provide our substitute teachers with an increase in their daily rates, hoping that we could get more substitutes working for our school district. We had many that were hired, but not necessarily responding. So as of March 1, from March 1st until now, we've had 155 substitute teachers that have worked, 155 different teachers. So only 129 are available for daily assignments. And that is because the 6 of those 155 were hired as learning loss. 6 of the 155 were our specific site substitutes that are working at secondary sites. And then we have 14 long-term substitutes that are working in Classic for coverage on long-term leaves. So we have 2 groups that we utilize every day, and there's 54 that have committed. And as you see, I broke them down for you. We only had 3 that requested just virtual, 13 that will do both, and then 13 that will do just Classic, and then 38 that will do both. And then we have 17 that didn't respond to the survey and commit. However, they are responding to phone calls. It's just, there's no commitment to either virtual, Classic, or both. But we do have a large number there.
Got it. And Rachel, on this slide, do you have a sense of that? Is this all in Classic staff, or is this a combination of in Classic virtual?
I do have that. So what we've seen over this entire year is definitely a higher number of absences in Classic. That could be because people that are working virtual could be telecommuting, many different reasons. But so as of like Friday, the March 19th, 21 of the 89 were virtual, 6 virtual and Classic, and then 62 Classic.
Perfect. And as a follow-up, I know that we had the governor sign the Family First Response Corona Act. Was it the governor or was it the federal?
Well, the governor signed it on Friday, I believe. And so that is the next rollout of information for our staff. They did extend the FFCRA leave through the state, and it does include a few items that are similar to the FFCRA, but it also includes vaccination appointments. there will be an available 10 days for COVID-related absences as outlined previously in the FFCRA. So that update will be going out to staff this week.
Got it, because as I'm looking at this, March 19th, 89, and with them, most of our staff have not even gotten the second dose, or, it's going to be this next week, these next two to 3 weeks where we're going to see that number probably.
If you go back one slide, Dr. Doyle, let's go back to, actually 2 slides. We'll go back to the quartiles really quick. So they actually rolled it out very quickly. So this would have been the initial time that somebody could have had their first dose. So if you go 2 to 3 weeks out from these dates, you're looking at this week and next week.
Okay.
Vaccination appointments were really quick. Mine was within, well, I could have had it the next day, but I went 2 days out to get an evening appointment.
Got it. Thank you for that. Julie?
Hi, Rachel. Couple questions for you. On this slide here, the quartile slide, it kind of goes along with a story that made the news last week about VIBA having sent out about 90,000 invitations throughout the county, and only about 29,000 of those resulting in booked appointments. And at the time that I was briefed on that, I heard speculation that many teachers had gone prior to receive vaccines, and the VIBA invite was no longer necessary because they had found other alternatives before that system rolled out. I was wondering what sense you have here in VUSD of the response rate to the VIBA invites, and like any gauge at all as to the percentage of our staff that has proceeded ahead with getting vaccinated.
So unfortunately, due to the way they rolled this out, I thought it was a great system. However, we did not have any access to the information or how many people were getting that first dose or registering for the vaccination. I can say there were 3 options. Like you said, some people had found an alternative option prior. We also partnered with Tri-City, and they were offering appointments to a lot of our employees about 2 days, I believe 2 days before VIBA rolled out. And then also people can also go with their medical provider and do that as well. So as far as the, I can't predict how many people have responded through VIBA, but I can say after spring break, we will be doing a kind of like vaccination campaign to identify how many people have participated. So we should have some numbers within the last 2 weeks, not necessarily if they participated from VIBA, but if they've received vaccination.
That's awesome. Thanks. And then just to answer the question that I've seen comes up quite a bit, are we requiring our staff to vaccinate? And if we aren't, which I know we're not, can you elaborate a little bit on why that might be?
So no, we are not requiring. If we did require, we would have needed to negotiate that piece. I'm not sure if there is a district that is requiring it. So at this point, it's an option for an employee to do that. One of the pieces of information that's going to go out in the next few weeks are some flyers, encouraging and just giving that access to VIBA again to employees that didn't choose to do it the first time.
Thank you.
Other questions for Rachel or other questions on this presentation? All right, Dr. Doe, I believe the last slide on this is the next item. Is that correct? Perfect. With that, Chris, how many speakers do we have for item 4C?
President Vargas, we have 4 speakers.
Perfect. Once again, to the speakers, the item before us is the board discussion and action on secondary school reopening for in-person learning 5 days a week. So please refer your comments to this discussion. You will have 3 minutes, and Chris will call your name and unmute you. Chris, call the first speaker.
The first speaker is Ilana Price.
Hello, you guys were cutting out. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hello and good evening. Wow, it's like Groundhog's Day. I would first like to apologize to the members of this board, Dr. Doyle, and any teacher, staff member, or parent that I may have offended over this past year. I have been so angry, so frustrated, and so completely at a loss in how to help them solve these many problems this past year has thrown at us. I pray to God that we stop this divide between one another and finally start working together as a community in the interest of protecting our greatest gift, our children. Board members, it is your honor and duty to protect our children's rights. Our children are so lucky to have a constitutional right to be educated to the fullest, and it is your job, your honor, to see that they are the most important factor in your decision making. This year has not been an easy one, to say the least. It is time to be on the right side of history. It is time to put all interests aside. It is time to show our children that they are the most important thing to us, that their loss of a year without friends, without school, without some normalcy is at an end. I am asking you to please honor the students that chose classic learning and to no longer delay them in returning to campus full time. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Alana. The next speaker is Diana Bailon.
And I don't see Diana as an attendee. Is that correct?
You are correct, President Vargas. Thank you. The next speaker is Steve Pritchard. We will give him an opportunity to speak. He was having audio trouble earlier. I can read his statement if he's unable to speak. Mr. Pritchard, are you able to make your comment? I will take that as a no. So President Vargas, I'm going to read his statement out loud. He says he would like to speak about this item. Kids and families have been adapting to many changes and recommendations and virtual learning options since the beginning of this pandemic. They need continuity and stability at this stage. I don't believe any changes should be forced in the middle of the semester. Since California is blessed with some of the nicest weather in the nation, we should utilize the outdoor setting for smaller groups in classrooms, as well as gymnasiums, auditoriums, and other buildings to allow for proper social distancing. Since there is a lot of evidence showing that continuous mask use can cause various health problems long-term, I think we should offer choices in smaller learning pods or groups, allowing families and kids to make their own decision about wearing a mask for the entire day. An indoor classroom or sitting outside for the outdoor classroom in small groups where fresh air and sunshine can help with the dispersal of germs, resulting in less germ saturation and less risk. This option would not require additional teachers or staff. Instead, it would allow teachers to get a break as they spend their time balancing between the indoor classroom and outdoor groups to give guidance and teaching instruction. We can also consider splitting the week up in order to allow proper social distancing and room between students, maybe 3 days a week in class and 2 days a week virtual, and then the students' attendance live can be staggered throughout the week to allow those teachers to accommodate smaller classroom sizes and better social distancing. Lastly, I've heard rumors of a possible requirement for this experimental vaccination, and I would like to remind the people involved and encourage the board to make a decision with this in mind. The EUA, or Emergency Use Authorization, granted by the FDA, requires that the person being given the unapproved product be advised of benefits and risks and their right to refuse the product. The Nuremberg Code of 1947, which was adopted by the California legislature, is in place to protect our fundamental right to avoid any imposed human experimentation. Thank you for your time, Mr. Pritchard. And President Vargas, the final speaker is Mrs. Gonzalez. Let me see if she's in attendance. I do not see her listed. So President Vargas, you can move on.
Okay, perfect. With that, we are at the discussion. Dr. Dill, there is no presentation for this item, correct? It's board deliberations and discussions. Is that accurate?
Correct, correct. And just, we have Randy here as well. So Randy's available if you have any questions.
Perfect. So this is the board discussion on action on secondary school reopening for in-person learning 5 days a week.
Well, and keep in mind, let me add one thing, President Vargas, and Randy, please jump in to clarify. We do need an action from the board because we would use that action in our response to the legal court case on the 8th. It's required on the 8th. And if everyone remembers, our next board meeting is the 8th. And so discussion, however, we would also need action as it relates to how we're going to respond to the court case and respond to the revisions to the Cdph guidelines. Randy, is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, I agree with your statement, and I believe there needs to be action.
Perfect. With that, I'm going to open it up for board members.
Do you want to start with a motion? What do we need to do with this? Do I start with a motion to say, I make a motion that we come up with a plan to open April 5th according to the judge's TRO? I'm asking, I'm not making the motion. I'm just asking how we want this conversation to go.
Yeah, this is Randy, and I don't think that any of the action has to refer to or reference TRO. So I think whatever action the board decides to take, the board can make, and doing whatever else the board's been notified of. It's had the TRO, knows what the court's decision is, but I don't think the board action has to incorporate the TRO, because the TRO also can disappear into an injunction. So I would say take whatever board action you deem appropriate, but I wouldn't incorporate the judge's temporary restraining order.
Okay, so I make a motion that we open 5 days a week for the parents who chose Classic on April 5th, if we already did pass the county. So there's my motion.
I second.
Before I call the vote, Rosemary, I want to make sure I capture the motion. So your motion is to open 5 days a week on April 5th, and then the second part, if?
For the parents who choose, it was their choice.
For the parents that chose
to have their students on campus. I mean, I would like to add a piece about the county guidelines, but they already approved us, so that's a moot point. Maybe.
Perfect. So the motion on the floor is to open 5 days a week on April 5th for the parents that chose to have their students on campus. Is that correct?
Yes.
Perfect. And there's a second on the floor. With that, we will open it up for discussion.
Perfect.
I have a suggestion that we also reference the vote that we took on February 18th, which was to resume 5 day a week in-person instruction for our Classic families. Assuming we got the exemption, which now has officially been retired from the process. But I think it's, it's important that we made this decision a month ago to move in this direction, and we can reference, this is in light of the new development.
If you want to amend it, Julie, you would have to make a friendly amendment.
A friendly amendment?
Well,
okay.
I already put the
Okay.
motion out there. So if you want any changes to it, you have to ask to amend it.
Okay. Well, maybe I don't. I mean, what's everybody's thought? What do you think about that?
And sorry, Julie, I didn't get to hear the full perspective. There was a recommendation to make a friendly amendment, but request or your information was February 18th, reference to the February 18th action that this board taken. So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, on the 18th, we voted unanimously to move forward with applying for the exemption that would allow us to get back to 5-day a week in person for classic families. So, we're continuing on that path. Is the only thing I would, like talk amongst ourselves about if we feel that's relevant to include in the language of our motion, or just, it's worth
I don't
mentioning.
know, what are the rules if somebody wants to change the motion? Do they have to make a motion to change the motion before we discuss it? Or do we just say, oh, let's just change this and then we talk about it and then we change it? Because right now there is a motion on the floor.
Correct.
Yeah.
So if it's a friendly amendment, I would ask the maker of the motion if they accept that. If not, then we would call a vote and with that, vote it up or down. Randy, as the lawyer, is that the right pathway?
I believe it is.
So I don't really feel that I need to change it back to our other vote. I mean, we're here, we're going, we were told by the courts we have to do it. Unless everybody else thinks it is, then, I have to decide by myself if she can make it?
No, so if she wants to add a friendly amendment, I don't think she has offered that yet already.
Right, she hasn't, no. So Julie, it's, ball's in your court now, dear.
Well, with Randy's thumbs up, I'd like to suggest a friendly amendment to the motion that we are continuing on the path that we established with our February 18th vote to move forward with in-person instruction for classic families for 5 days a week.
And Julie, I think where I'm struggling with, there's like, it doesn't change the motion, the main motion on the floor. And so.
No, that's why, I guess it's at least a discussion point. I don't know if it changes anything other than ultimately the language that goes to the court. And just clarifying, where Vista's been on this matter.
And I think that would be definitely good feedback for Randy to take back because, we are writing that document by next Thursday.
I don't think there would be, I don't think it would change the motion much. And to incorporate the issue, if you just added in front of it to reference consistent with this board's prior vote on February 18th, 2021, comma, and then the statement to open schools 5 days a week on April 5th for parents who choose to have their children on campus. So I think it does clarify that this board had already made that decision. So if the board wants to, I think they can add that consistent with this board's decision on December 18th, 2021 in front of the prior resolution. Once again, that's up to this board.
However, the board voted on February 18th to bring all the students back 5 days a week when we were in the orange tier. So that would change the motion because we would have to add the orange tier to it. That was the original vote on February 18th.
That would definitely be a change the motion. And if we are not in the orange tier, that could definitely change the April 8th date. So just want to point that out.
April 5th date, not April 8th date. I believe the motion said April 5th.
Yes, it did.
You're correct.
Yeah, and sorry to be unclear there. I wasn't trying to put orange tier restrictions back in. It's my understanding from the TRO that, school districts cannot impinge on the judge's order, and didn't mean to suggest that, only meant to establish, for our purpose, as a district named in the lawsuit, that we have already made a good faith effort to move in that direction.
So if I
hold on, Rosemary, we'll have Randy, and then I'll call on you next.
I was just going to say, for purposes, once again, the issue does not have to be phrased, or the resolution does not have to be passed to satisfy necessarily the court. So the fact of what the board did back on February 18th, that can be submitted to the court through a declaration. So if it's not deemed by the board not to be necessary, the original resolution is fine. I can still make the argument through a declaration from superintendent or someone else from the district regarding that prior issue. So once again, I don't need the board to focus necessarily on the order, but necessarily the issue at hand.
So I will respond to this because I get a little nervous when we start messing with people's motions, because that motion on that day, I made the original motion without putting the orange tier in it. But the process wasn't where we did that. Nobody made a friendly amendment until the orange tier, till I was talked to putting in the orange tier. So going forward, if we're going to change this motion to add that vote in, I want to make it clear that it truly doesn't change the meaning of the motion that I just made. And I think you and I are on the same page, Julie, with that, right?
Absolutely. I'm not trying to change.
Right.
I'm just trying to like add
I just don't want to
that
get
history.
right.
So maybe,
I just don't want. Go ahead.
I was just going to say maybe Randy's solution is the one, like
Right.
he can include in the separate statement our history. I just want our history noted, I
Okay.
guess. So, and I
Right.
do agree with the language that you originally stated.
Okay, so then we can talk about that opening on the 5th.
Perfect. And I hear you, Rosemary, and with that, amendments can change the main motion, but that's not the intent right now. But for the record, the amendments can change the whole main motion if the board approves it up or down. So, but we're not at that point in time.
No, and I did know that. I just, before somebody amended this, I wanted to, and I said, okay, for my motion, I wanted to make sure my motion wasn't being changed.
With that, a couple questions on my end, Dr. Doe. What is the soonest we can get to the orange tier, like the soonest date? Is it 2 consecutive weeks? So would that be next Tuesday, or would it be the following Tuesday?
It would theoretically April 5th.
Okay.
Actually, April 6th. 2 exact weeks. Based on where we are with the numbers, that's highly possible. But again, we would be guessing.
Got it. And a follow-up question, Randy. Right now, the court hearing has been pushed back. With that, the main motion right now represents April 5th. With that, are we able to do this? And with it, like in the case that the court goes sideways or goes the opposite direction, we could in theory be back and having to revisit the plan. Is that, like trying to figure out, the many ways this can go about.
I believe that's highly unlikely to happen. I can't say it's impossible, but it's highly unlikely that the court's decision is going to change much. My belief is, and so if the board took the type of action that was recommended, I don't think that it would be touched by what the court's going to be doing with this case. I can't guarantee it, but that's the likely result.
Perfect. And this is also the week after spring break. Rachel, can you speak about the traveling orders that are currently in place or the recommendations that are in place for people that do travel?
There are no restrictions.
Okay, perfect. And then the last question, and this is coming from our 2x2 block. Nicole, you mentioned that we may need an extra day to get our students accommodated and accustomed to like what is happening in the in-person learning. Do you think that is still the case, or can you speak to that? Going from not being in person for a couple months, that may, we may need to do some readjustments, but can you speak and elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think we're ready to go. If you want us to go back on Monday, we can make Monday happen. The biggest thing for us is, Amy's team with transportation and child nutrition services, making sure we're fully staffed for that, as well as having John Wathen's team help move desks back into classrooms. But lucky for us as a district, we were back a few months ago in full force. So we have all the mitigation and everything ready to go, the dividers on desks, things like that. So we could take a day to reset, or we could come back as Trustee Smithfield said, right on that Monday after spring break.
Got it. And I guess if we are having staff move furniture, would it be currently April 5th? So that, because we're in spring break, or our staff working during spring break that can move furniture?
Amy, do you want to answer that question?
Yes, classified staff will be working during spring break.
So are you finished, Cipriano?
I am. And with that, I do want to call on other board members that have not spoken. Are there any board members that have not spoken that would like to ask questions?
Yeah, I have a comment about teacher prep. Are we able to compensate the teachers for working during spring break to prep for that Monday return in case they have to change their plans, or modify their plans for in-person instruction on Monday?
But based on the board's decision tonight, Rachel will go back, as she always has, and connect with the union and educators and make sure that they have the necessary supports to be successful on that Monday. So I fully expect Rachel to follow through on that. Rachel, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, there will be a notice to VTA following this board meeting, depending on what the board takes action on, and then we will have those meetings and communication with VTA if there is anything that they are requesting.
It is important to note, Board Member Alvarado, that we have made accommodations for teachers to prep in the past, and they have gotten what they needed to make sure that they're fully supported to be successful. So I would anticipate that Rachel will continue to do what we've always done and work with our union and our teachers to make sure they have what they need to be successful.
Other questions from other board members? Rosemary, you seem like you had a comment.
Yeah, I do. So back to your questions, Cipriano. I just need to understand where your head is. So you're asking if we go back and we go, you asked about the orange tier, which I think is a moot point at this time. We don't need to worry about the orange tier anymore. Science has told us differently. So you're saying if we went back and then the court decided not to follow through with this, can we bring the kids back? And that's something, as this board, if you think the majority is going to want to do that, we need to talk about that more in depth right now. And then the extra day on that Monday, or these kids, every one of these kids has already been on campus. They know the hand washing stations, they know the rules, they know the routine, they know what's expected of them. We don't need to take another day of learning away from them to put them on the computer to show them how to be safe at school. So I think, Nicole, you already know my feeling on that. We have to get these kids back in school.
Correct, and I think it's definitely our students are back on campus, but I do think it's different when you have, all of them at full capacity. And we visited Mission Vista a couple of weeks ago, Rosemary, and with it, we have the A and B model, which I think they know how to work within the A and B model. But when the A and B model are there together, that's going to be a difference. And we may not need that extra day, but I think I wanted to get that context to making sure that we are ready and prepared for day number one.
But they were all there in October, Cipriano. This is not the first time they're all going to be there. They were all there for those weeks that we had them on campus. Every person that chose Classic.
I would also like to add that VITA and RBB were on campus for about 21 to 26 days in October. And the only reason they had to pivot back was because of the rise in cases. The students know how to do this as a group. They've done it before. They are elated and they're waiting, and they can't wait another day. They need to go back on Monday April 5th. This is imperative for their health.
Got it. Other questions, comments from other board members? There is a motion on the floor and there is a second on that. And at this point in time, there has not been a friendly amendment. Randy, any other information you need for the statement on your end?
No, I don't need any, once again, the board's action will be the board's action, and I may need some supplemental declarations or whatever else, but that's separate and apart from the board action.
Perfect. If there are no more comments or questions, I'm going to go ahead and call the vote. With that, Trustee Kelly.
Aye.
Before I call the vote, just want to make sure for the record, we are clear on what we're voting on. So Rosemary, your motion was to open on April 5th for the parents that chose to have their students on campus. And there was a second. Is that the correct motion?
Yes, 5 days a week.
So April 5th for the parents that chose to have their students open on campus for 5 days a week. And that is the discussion we're having. So thank you for that. So with that, calling the vote, Trustee Kelly,
Aye.
Trustee Smithfield,
Aye.
Trustee Alvarado,
Aye.
Trustee Morton,
Aye.
and aye, motion carries.
Thank you.
All right,
Briefing
with
done.
that, we have our next board meeting is scheduled for April 8th, which will be definitely an exciting day because that is the same day as the hearing. And so we probably get an update on that. But Dr. Doyle, before we wrap up, anything else you need from us?
Thank you so much. I want to thank the board members for rearranging their time to be at the special board meeting. I know that it does have an impact on your personal lives and your professional lives. So thank you for making this accommodation. I also want to thank Nicole Allard because we actually had a local control accountability plan meeting at exactly the same time. So I want to personally thank Nicole for being flexible because she did that on her own. Thank you, Nicole. And then lastly, and perhaps most importantly, I want to thank Randy. Randy didn't know that he was going to be meeting with us about 100 times, but we really appreciate you taking time out of your day, Randy. You've been very helpful to us. You've been very supportive of our board members, and tonight, supportive of our community. So thank you so much for supporting us as we go through this process. President Vargas, appreciate your leadership. It's all yours.
All right, so with that, once again, our next board meeting is April 8th. With that, I adjourn this meeting at 7:59. That is 7:59 and not 11:59.